So for part of the thing we wanted to do, we've been calling it DAO OS, but just to give everybody a little context, it's based on the Canvas operating system of really like how to stand up an organization, especially in like this type of dynamic, very flat distributed teams. So part of the work was to really kind of just take a step back and see, really ask ourselves the hard questions on how we work and why we work, and is it serving us well, or is it something that needs to be revamped and changed? Chase will kind of run us down through some of these things that we're now turning into action items. And one of the things that I think is the most cool that came out of this was the just the idea flow on how projects get injected into Moonshot to get where they need to go. So back to you, Chase.
Awesome. I'm going to stop real quick to see if there's any questions about like what DAO OS is, why we did it at a high level, and then if anybody else from the team wants to chime in on kind of the purpose of this. We'll stop there before I get into the nitty-gritty details at the very least. All right. So the way I'm going to think about this or talk about this is kind of the key highlights that we had coming out of this up to this point. Please know this is still a work in progress, and this is just our efforts in being transparent into what we've accomplished thus far, what are some of the key highlights, and then what are the next steps in order to bring us to the finish line. And then please feel free to interrupt me with any questions. So the first thing that we discussed, and honestly, the big part of the first conversation we had was about purpose and strategy. And really the questions that we wanted to answer for that is, we exist so that what? How do we orient and steer? What is our reason for being at the heart of any organization, team, or individual? And you'll see common themes of the color of stickies across all of these segments. The first one we talked about, again, was purpose, and the green stickies are things that are going well that allows us to have a good purpose, things that allow us to work quicker, things that are a strong point in Moonshot Collective as it relates to purpose there. The orange stickies were more of the pain points of like what is causing us to go slow or be less confident in the work that we're doing, preventing us to do the best work that we can possibly do as individuals, as teammates, so on and so forth. And then the pink or red colored sticky notes were what is like something that is completely missing, something we feel like we don't have at all, that is preventing us again from being our best selves as Moonshot Collective. So as you can kind of see, there was a common theme here in the bottom right hand corner where the vision and mission, or like the overall purpose of Moonshot, has changed so much that we weren't fully sure of like what that big picture is, why we are here as Moonshot, what are we trying to do, so on and so forth. But what we did realize was there was a lot of quality around like we're working towards a common goal, but we weren't positive what that goal was. We have a really strong team that is very synergetic and allows us to work together in the sense of rapid prototyping and exploration. And so what we wanted to do from there is really boil that down into something that was tangible, that we can say, hey, someone asks you on the street, you're wearing a Moonshot shirt, and they ask you, what do you do and why do you do those things at Moonshot? And we came out with like 5 or 6 common themes here. And those common themes were initiatives aligned to the Gitcoin mission, which essentially is coordination problems and funding public goods. Moonshot Collective is going to be a place within the Gitcoin DAO that builds teams and best practices to be an example across not only the Gitcoin DAO, but DAOs in the Web3 ecosystem. We want to make sure that we're continuously innovating and finding our next Moonshot. The next piece of that is, again, it kind of correlates back to the teams and best practices, but Gitcoin's DAO trusted source of software development. So if there is a need of software development, people can look inside to Moonshot and see, one, how it's doing, or if it comes down to it, we can work together in building something that is quality software that truly solves a problem, adds value to said problem area. The last 2 pieces of it are, we want to make sure that we're building technology to onboard new people to Web3 and being a place that's inclusive to everybody to be able to join, to see what we're doing, to learn from the best practices that we have in terms of building software. And last but not least, while we're continuously innovating, we want to do that through rapid prototyping as well as experimentation in terms of using software to solve DAOs, Web3 communities, so on and so forth, problems, if that makes sense. I'm going to stop there to see if anybody that participated in this experience has anything else that they want to add to the purpose piece of the conversation, or if there's any questions about the purpose, feel free to ask now as well. All right, I'll take silence as you all love it and agree with everything. So when you have a purpose, it's the next question you really have to ask yourself is how do you actually execute on that strategy, or what is it that you need to execute on the purpose? Sorry, which in return is again the strategy. So really, when we thought about this, is like what are the critical factors that would mean the difference between success and failure? How do we develop, refine, and refresh our strategy? And how do we use that strategy to filter and steer day by day? As you can tell, there was a lot of conversation and strategy, and I swear I think we talked about this for a good 2 hours, which is really good. And some of the key questions that we had here is, what is our research and development strategy? We want to research, we want to experiment and prototype, and we want to validate. And then the key decision point that we want to get to is, do we actually send this to production? And when we think about sending out a production, how do we launch it out of Moonshot Collective? Is it going to be a work stream that already exists? Is it going to be a brand new work stream, and making sure that there is validation, that there is a problem solution fit there? And then to actually execute on that strategy, we need teams that are collaborative, cross-functional, with clear roles and responsibilities, and having asynchronous ways of working. Our communication, again, really needs to be transparent and structured, and we want to make sure that we're focused on doing that internally as well as externally. And really, when we're talking about externally, is like, how do we get buy-in from the community? How do we allow for times like this for the community to come join us, talk about what we're doing as Moonshot Collective, and give feedback to make us our best selves? I will stop there to see if there's any questions about the high-level strategy there. And if anybody that was part of this, Emu, Fahim, Samir, that wants to add to some of the key conversation points on the strategy, please feel free to do so.
No, yeah, everything makes sense on my part. Yeah.
All right. So going next, another key highlight here is, I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to talk through some of the key pieces here. Is who are the people that come into Moonshot? And as we conversated, we saw that there was like key pieces of this membership that kind of really shown itself very transparently. And it seems like there's like 3 buckets of people that come into Moonshot. There's the community, which is just people coming into Moonshot that want to onboard, listen to what Moonshot's about, and then generally they can then become active contributors. And that's really going to be the people that come in and have raised their hand as somebody that wants to contribute to Moonshot, as somebody that is going to help build, help product manage, help be a community engagement person, all the different roles that make that successful within Moonshot. And then there's like a core team that's there, like always there, that helps turn this wheel that we're talking about in terms of strategy, and making sure that it's turning at a speed that we're comfortable with, and producing the value that the stewards and the community expect out of Moonshot Collective. Something that we do have upcoming within this is actually, or one of the next steps is going to be, how do we finalize what roles and responsibilities we actually need within those 3 areas to make Moonshot Collective, given the strategy that we just talked about. And just a view into the future, I'll show you the process for the strategy at a lower level. But again, we just need to figure out who is going to be in our wheel to make that successful. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any questions about membership, the 3 groups that are there, and how it relates to the strategy. All right. And then one of the last key highlights that we had was, we went through all of our meetings and we asked ourselves the question of, what do we need from each of our perspectives that are in Moonshot Collective to be successful in terms of a meeting cadence? And one of the key things that we talked about was, we need to make sure that there is a meeting cadence that is on the books for us to run and operate Moonshot Collective as we see fit, in terms of adding value to the community again and again to the stewards. And we realized that maybe what we had right now wasn't the best thing. So we kind of talked through and laid out, what exactly do we have today, and re-level set on what are the key value props of each meeting, and what are we trying to get out of those. All of the meetings still stand true, but a lot of what we were missing was alignment on what the value props were. So as a group, we came together and we laid out what those value props were and what cadence we need for each of those meetings to feel like we can actually achieve the value out of each of those meetings. So you all as Moonshot Collective will be able to see this new cadence coming forward once we do finalize what this actually looks like to us, and we actually complete DAO OS. You probably haven't seen any changes quite yet because we're still finalizing DAO OS as it stands, but this view right here is really going to be what's going forward. And as I mentioned, the next steps is to actually roll this meeting cadence out and bring in the community to participate in the cadence where we see fit. Would love any feedback on any meetings or things that feel valuable to you all, don't feel valuable to you all. Again, open to any feedback from the group that we have here. And if anybody else would like to add any thoughts on how we discuss the meetings, would love that as well.
I think for the most part, with these like DAO OS calls, one thing that has come up and like we are reiterating is that keeping the core of Moonshot going forward. And we're at an inflection point definitely with Moonshot where we're growing and we need to like scale our operations, and like this OS, like this meeting has really enabled us to think about keeping the core values of Moonshot while growing it and scaling it and being able to tackle more projects and just keep hitting like just making Moonshot better as it grows and expands.
Yeah, absolutely, Fahim. That's awesome. Does that resonate with everybody? Does anybody have any questions with what Fahim said? I think that was perfectly laid out of like the value that we're really looking for as an outcome coming out of DAO OS.
And on top of that, I feel like it's sort of like an audit of our current processes and like where we can optimize and improve. Because as you might know, working in a DAO might be stressful, might succumb to the coordination failures and all that. And so this is a great tool. And it's not just for Moonshot, you know, like you could take this back to your own DAO and go ahead and do this with your own DAO and really figure out like, hey, how do we work with each other? How can we grow with each other? And more importantly, like how can we, like Fahim mentioned, like keep our core values as we like grow and scale.
Cool. Any other questions or any thoughts on how that's resonating with everybody? I saved the big item for last that might be more exciting to everybody, and it's how we actually work and bring ideas into Moonshot and bring those from start to finish. But I do want to give everybody a second to talk about their thoughts, whatever it might be, based on this high-level DAO OS conversation and some of the key highlights and next steps that we've had.
One thing I'll say is I thought it was really cool, like even helping to like prep for this and like knowing what might come out of it, you're still surprised and shocked like when a group of people gets together and like can like, you know, get on a Miro board and document like the core values that the organization has, right? And just like kind of just all coming together on those things. But also too, like one thing to just highlight is that this is a process that we're not going to do once. Like it might be something we do once a quarter, once every 6 months to really like kind of level set again. So for anybody else that like wasn't included in this one, that like, you know, next time, let's say they're contributing full time or something like that, and like wants to participate in these things in the future, like 100%, you know what I mean? So it's not like a one time only.
Yeah, because I think as we scale, things are going to change as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really interested in that you guys are doing this. How can we provide feedback? That will be one question. And the second is, what do you guys see as the biggest pain points of the process right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we might even get into this like pain points, but from my point of view is like one of the biggest pain points that came out of this conversation that had a lot of like detail and thoughts put into it is like, how are we intaking work? And then how do we, one, make sure that that the work that we're intaking is valuable to the purpose of Moonshot? And then how do we prioritize that work in a way that allows for Moonshot developers, or I'm just going to call them us knowledge workers, because we're not all developers and we bring in a lot of different skill sets, but how can we get as many people that are interested in the Moonshot purpose and actually developing the things that we're doing within Moonshot Collective in a process that is focused on innovation, that is focused on experimentation and rapid prototyping, and finding ways that we can find that next Moonshot. And the strategy that we came up with, that was where a lot of the pain points came out of, but allowed us to really fundamentally talk about what we want to see out of Moonshot Collective going forward. But anybody else that was on these calls, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts in terms of those questions.
I would second that too. I think going into it, that was one of the biggest pain points that we had, of like no one knew what to do next kind of thing. And also like one other thing is kind of just like coming out of it to have these action items so we know who's responsible to like make what decisions. So when something needs to be decided, like, you know where to go versus like just picking an entire channel of 50 people and like no one really like knows who's supposed to make decisions, and that kind of gets weird in a DAO, right? And it's like then you have 100 people not making any decisions, which is the worst decision. So like really just coming together and defining that whole process.
Does that answer your question? Sorry, I'm not looking at my screen to see who was talking. I just want to make sure that answered your question.
Yeah, it's Eric Knobel. Thank you. Thank you also for mentioning that we are not all developers, because I am a UX designer,
Yeah.
and I have been, and I think you guys also have been trying to find a place for me into the workflow, and at sometimes we have been not completely successful. At the moment, I think we are working great at TokenStream with Samir, but not all projects have been working that good, right? So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Eric, you also asked another question of like, where should people provide feedback? I think that's a really good question, and other people feel free to make suggestions, but I'd say for now, just like the whole Moonshot channel, I think could be a good spot, because I don't think we have like a dedicated place to do that yet, and I think that's one of the things that a smaller group of us are working on for like implementing this idea flow of like how do ideas come in and like where do they come in and like who makes the decisions. So hopefully we can have something for feedback, just general as well, but that would be my suggestion for now. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely agreed, Michael. And as we get this closer to a final state, I think we'll send out some like key artifacts to a larger community to give that feedback in those channels that Michael have talked about. And like one of the key values again that we talked about is receiving feedback from the whole community. And we will definitely make sure that the means are there for you and anybody else that has feedback on the outcomes of this to be able to provide that. Any other questions on like the high level highlights and next steps of the DAO OS? If not, I will talk a little bit about the TLDR idea flow that we have and some of the next steps that we have to kind of put the bow and wrapper on the process. Cool. So to kind of go back to like one of the key pain points that we talked about in DAO OS was we don't really have a great way of intaking work. We don't have a great way of prioritizing that work. And then we also don't have a great way of like showing what is coming next from that prioritized list of things that are coming into Moonshot. But what we did come down to was a process of when work does start, what does that actually look like, and how does Moonshot actually work? And I want everybody to like anchor back to the idea of our purpose of like making sure that we're adding value to the Gitcoin DAO's mission, making sure that we are the prime example of how to build software within Gitcoin DAO and where people look for those best practices. So what that best practice looks like as a framework and the key word there is a framework. This is just like an idea of how we should get started. It's not meant to fit like a glove. It's not going to work exactly how it should from team to team, but it's a place to get started of like how we should think about work in Moonshot. And again, the key pieces of that, like of this process is fast and iterative prototyping and making sure that we're experimenting quickly with those prototypes to learn and validate problems and solutions. So when we think about this as an approach, we think about it in 3 different phases. And that first phase is really the problem. And what we want to learn there is taking an idea or a theme and making sure that there is traction for the problem that we're assuming are out there, or learning about new problems within that themed area. And coming out of that, we should have a good list of problems and problem statements that we can then work together as a team and community to prioritize down to a smaller list of problems that have been validated by our target personas. And once we get there, we're going to move into that solution phase. And that's when it really becomes like that fast, iterative prototyping factory that we all know Moonshot is today. And we want to be able to work together as a community to think about different ideas. And again, I want to use the word ideas and be explicit about that. when we think of ideas, it's going to be a lot of different things that could potentially solve the validated problem. And so that's kind of the second phase here. And coming to this point, we should have many potential solutions for that prioritized problem statement. And those should be built in different means, whether it is actual prototypes, whether it's wireframes. But again, the key here is moving fast and being able to iterate on those different prototypes and being able to experiment those with the community. And once we have that, we should start using the community and our different means to talk to people to start validating which of those ideas can actually be solutions to solve said problem. And once we get down to there, we should either have an idea that like technology or software can actually solve this problem. And if the answer is no, that's okay. That's an okay success in our books as well. Actually invalidating that there isn't going to be a problem and solution fit and where we thought we were. But if there was, we then have to go into a third phase of like this solution or solutions that we deem as problem solution fit. What does that opportunity actually look like? Is it big enough to continue spending money and investing in to actually solve that problem in the market? And we have to ask ourselves the questions of how big is it? Is it a buffalo or a squirrel? If it's a squirrel, we might not want to spend a bunch of money and spinning that out into its own work stream or putting it into an existing work stream and other ideas that we might have. But if it's a buffalo, then maybe it does make sense. And we then ask ourselves that question of, is there a work stream out there that this fits under? If not, maybe we just spin up a new work stream and people can then carry that forward and take it from 1 to 100 or 1 to 10, if that makes sense. But the next steps of this is like, how do we actually have the funnel up top to feed the strategy that we just talked about? And then what does it actually look like at the end to like as a process to spin that out into a work stream or an existing work stream, if that makes sense. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any feedback, questions, comments, concerns from the group.
So what are some of the questions that you guys are asking now for the top of the funnel strategies, right? How do you funnel in needs and the requirements?
So just so I can regurgitate that question back to the group is, how have we started thinking about the process to have that funnel of work?
Yeah, the phase 1 problem gathering.
Yeah, so I think that, like, as I mentioned, that's kind of like a next step for us to like come together as a group to figure out how we actually build that funnel, because that was a key pain point to your point from the group is we don't have that funnel. And I think like a lot of people on this call can echo that. You all are excited about Moonshot, but there might not be that funnel of work to throw out to disseminate that work, if that makes sense. And I think a second layer of that is we need to think about how do we ensure we know what contributors are in Moonshot, what are their skill sets, and then also know what that funnel looks like. And then that really important piece is making sure we can then have a valuable matching process that adds value to the people that are doing the work as well as Moonshot, and bringing those two matches together, if that makes sense. And those are like the things that we're at right now in terms of thinking and finalizing in DAO OS.
Got it.
Any other like feedback from the group on this process, things that I missed, any questions, happy to answer them.
Just a general comment, saw this couple of days back, Kevin was sharing it on another call. Really excited for these changes coming up.
Awesome. All right, well, that was kind of it for DAO OS. Again, we'll ask for questions or comments on how this went, any feedback up to this point. Again, want to highlight that we will be continuing to ask for feedback from the community on this as things get finalized. So don't think this is your last and only chance.